do a video review on how to study for your quiz. So just remember, we talked about how to study for the quiz in class. We always want to refer to the note catcher, and then look over the homework and rework problems independently. So I'm going to help you correct and maybe rework the worksheet that we had assigned on Wednesday night. And just remember, before we do that, the note catcher had quite a few problems. There's a page of problems there that are very important to study on the note catcher, and also those are very important to study on the note catcher. But we're going to focus on these problems, which are also very important to study. Finding the perimeters and areas of rectangles, and then complex shapes, and then also some more challenging problems on the second side of this worksheet. So rather than go through all the steps on problems 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to pause that and just put the answers in, and we're going to focus on problems 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so we're going to focus on problem 4, and if you need to look at problems 1, 2, and 3, you can pause and look at those. So let's take a look at this complex figure below. So in this complex figure, we have two choices. We can divide the figure into rectangles, or we can surround and subtract. So if I decided to divide the figure into rectangles for the area, that would be my 3 rectangles. And if I surround it and subtract it, then what I would do is draw a big rectangle around the whole shape. And subtract out this bit here. And even though I think that method is the easiest method, for me, from walking around the class, I think the easier method for most people still is dividing the shape up. So that's the method I'm going to go with. But you can choose either approach. So if I divide my shape up to find the area, I would have 3 rectangles. I'll call this rectangle 1, rectangle 2, and rectangle 3. And I'm going to put my picture in the chart here. So my first rectangle is kind of tall and skinny. And that's 5 centimeters by 1.5 centimeters. I'm going to add that to my second rectangle, which is a little bit wider. And I'll figure the dimensions out in a minute. And my third rectangle is kind of like this. So these are just sketches. They don't have to be perfect. They're visual aids for us to think about the problem. I can tell on my third rectangle that this is 4.5 units high and 2.5 units wide. So the trick is to figure out the measurements of the second rectangle. And if you look at the complex figure, the distance from here to here is 2.5, which would be the same here. And this distance is 1.5, which is the same here. So I need to figure out this distance. And that distance has to be the third value that when added with the 1.5 and the 2.5, the 3 of them have to make 6 units. So 1.5, so I'm going to do my scratch work over here, and 2.5 adds up to 4. And since the whole distance across has to be 6, I know this has to be 2, because 6 take away 4 is 2. So this is 2. And then, since I know this is 2 units, this value here, this pink value here, right here, whoops, sorry, we'll make it red. This value here has to add with the 2 units. All of them together have to make the total 5 units. So this has to be 3, and that's this value here. That gives me all the information I need to find the area. So I'm going to work on area first. So my equation is area is 5 times 1.5, that's for rectangle 1, plus 3 times 2, that's for rectangle 2, plus the third rectangle, 2.5 times 4.5. So remember we talked about showing our scratch work up here so it's easier to read our final work. So I'm going to do 5 times 1.5 first. Five times 1 is 5 plus 2 is 7. So 5 times 1.5 is 7.5. So I'll put that down here. And I know this is 6, sorry. Almost made 5 there. And then I'll do 2.5 times 4.5 up here. Make a little more space there. I'm going to pause. And when I finish that multiplication, I just pause to save a little bit of time for you watching. This is 11.25. So when I add these together, so step 3 is showing your work. That's what I'm doing. I'm showing the main steps, but the scratch work I'm leaving in the scratch work area. And you can use mental math here. 13 and 11 make 24, and 0.50 and 0.25 make 0.75. So 24.75 centimeters squared. That's my final answer. So when we take a look at that, it's much easier to read with the scratch work up in the box. The next thing I'm going to do is focus on perimeter. So I'm actually going to erase all of this and clean it up for perimeter. Remember, perimeter is distance around a shape. So for example, if I started right here, I would add 2.5 plus 4.5 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1.5 plus 2. And if you remember, we found that to be 2 just a few minutes ago. Well, that's very, very fat. Let's fix that. But we still have to find this value right here. We'll call it x. Before I do that, I'm going to write my perimeter equation. So P is equal to, and remember I started right here, 2.5 plus 4.5 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1.5 plus 2 plus 2, and then I have to find that missing value. So if we go back up to this picture, and we notice that from here to here is 4.5. If I draw a straight line over across the top, that means this is 4.5. So this little bit here is 0.5, which is right here. So this bit here has to be 1.5 because the whole piece is 2. So that little bit is 1.5. That's the challenge of that problem, is finding the missing value. But once we have that, we've got our equation, and now we can do step 3 and show our work. So P, these two together make 7. These two together make 11. Let's say I could do all 3 of these together. 2 plus 2 is 4 plus 1.5. So that's 5.5. And then the 1.5. So this is 18. And that is 7. And adding 18 and 7 give us 25 centimeters. And then of course we should double check, maybe with some mental math. So I'll take a minute to pause and double check, and you can do the same. Okay. So I double checked my work and I came up with 25 centimeters. So when we take a step back and look at this, we have gone through problems 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to focus on the next page. So for problems 5 and 6, show how you arrive at each answer and include units. And I'm also going to remind you to put your equations in. We're focusing on equations. So when I read this problem, the perimeter of the rectangle is 20 centimeters. So we have to find the width of the rectangle. We'll call this the width then, since we have 5.5 here. So my first equation is going to be a perimeter equation, because that's what I started with. So I know the perimeter is 2 times 5.5 plus 2 times W. But I also know the perimeter is 20, and I know this makes 11. So my goal is to find that W. So when I look at my equation, what it tells me is that 11 plus whatever this is has to be equal to 20. So if I do the opposite or the inverse operation, I find that this 2W has to be 9, because 9 plus 11 makes 20. But I really only want one of the W's. So I have to take my 9 and divide it into 2, and that's 4.5. So I know that this is 4.5. And my units are centimeters. And so if we think about the operations that I used, over here I used subtraction. And over here I used division. Because I used inverse operations. So next, find the area of the rectangle. So my area is going to be 5.5 times 4.5. So I'm going to just use my picture over here and the area model, because that was a good way for me to do fraction multiplication. That's why we practiced it so much. And I think what I'm going to do, just to keep this sort of separate, is draw a line here so you don't mix those numbers up. So 4 times 5 is 20. Half of 4 is 2. Half of 5 is 2.5. And half of a half is a fourth. So when I add all of that up, 22, 24, plus a half and a fourth, my area is 24 3/4. And so 24 3/4, or 0.75 squared centimeters. Let's look at the next part. Now in the next part, we have the area of the rectangle is 24.8 square centimeters. So we have to find this bit here, the length. We know this is 3.1 because it's a rectangle, so we need those. So I'm going to start with an area equation. And I know area is 3.1 times whatever L is. But I also know the area is 24.8 from the reading. So I have to do the inverse operation to solve for L. Since I was multiplying, the opposite operation is division. I have to take 24.8 and divide by 3.1. And if you estimate, 3 times 8 is 24. And also, when you multiply with decimals, remove that decimal. I'm going to take it, my first estimate of 8 and check that first. And 8 times 1 is 8. And 8 times 3 is 24. So it works out to be a whole number. And we find that this value is in fact 8. And the units are centimeters. So since the operation, the inverse operation was division, that's all I needed to do on this problem. Now I have to find the perimeter. So my perimeter equation is 3.1 3.1, or you might even just do times 2, and then 8 times 2. And that's 6.2 plus 16. So 16 plus 6.2 is 22.2. And remember, perimeter is length, so it's centimeters, where area is square centimeters. This last problem, number 7, is not something we'll be quizzing on, so we'll talk about number 7 in class tomorrow.